My own tale. I must confess that I was a little taken aback on my last evening before leaving England, when Monsignor Maxwell turned on me suddenly at supper and exclaimed aloud that I had not yet contributed a story. I protested that I had none, that I was a prosaic person, that there was some packing to be done, that my business was to write down the stories of other people, that I had made my living and could not be liberal with my slender store, that it was a layman's function to sit at holy and learned priests' feet, not to presume to inform them on any subject under the sun. But it was impossible to resist. It was pointed out to me that I had listened on false pretenses if I had not intended to do my share, that telling a story did not hinder my printing it, and as a final argument it was declared that unless I occupied the chair that night, all present withdrew the leave that had already been given to me to print their stories on my return to England. There was nothing therefore to be done, and as I had already considered the possibility of the request, I did not occupy an unduly long time in pretending to remember what I had to say. When I was seated upstairs, and the fire had been poked according to the ritual, and the matches had gone round, the buckled shoes protruded side by side with elastic-ankled boots. I began. This is a very unsatisfactory story, I said, because it has no explanation of any kind. It is quite unlike Mr. Percival's. You will see that even theorizing is useless. When I come to the end, it is simply a series of facts that I have to relate, facts that have no significance except one that is supernatural. But it is utterly out of the question even to guess at that significance. It is unsatisfactory too for a second reason, and that is that it is on such a very hackneyed lines. It is simply one more instance of that very dreary class of phenomena named haunted houses, except that there's no ghost in it. Its only claim to interest is, as I've said, the complete futility of any attempt to explain it. This was a rather pompous exordium, I felt, but I thought it best not to raise expectations too high, and I was therefore deliberately dull. 16 years ago, from last summer, I was in Brittany. I'd left school, where I had laboured 2 hours a week at French for 4 years, and gone away in order to learn it in 6 weeks. This I accomplished very tolerably, in company with 5 other boys and an English tutor. Our general adventures are not relevant, but toward the end of our stay, we went over one Sunday from Portrieux in order to see a French chateau about 3 miles away. It was a really glorious June day, hot and fresh and exhilarating, and we lunched delightfully in the woods with a funny fat little French count and his wife who came with us from the hotel. It is impossible to imagine less uncanny circumstances or companions. After lunch, we all went cheerfully to the house, whose chimneys had been seen among the trees. I know nothing about the dates of the houses, but the sort of impression I got of this house was that it was about 300 years old. Yet it may equally have been 4 or 2. I do not know then, and do not know now, anything about it except its name, which I will not tell you, and its owner's name, which I will not tell you either, and something else that I will tell you. I will call the owner, if you please, comme Jean-Marie I. The house is built in 2 courts. The right-hand court through which we entered was then used as a farmyard, and I should think it probable that it is still so used. This court was exceedingly untidy. There was a large manure heap in the centre, and the servants' quarters to our right looked miserably cared for. There was a cart or 2 with shafts turned up near the sheds that were built against the wall opposite the gate, and a sleepy old dog with bleared eyes that looked at us crossly from his kennel door. Our French friend went across the servants' cottages with his moustache sticking out on either side of his face, and presently came back with 2 girls and the keys. There was no objection, he exclaimed dramatically, to our seeing the house. The girls went before us and unlocked the iron gate that led to the second court. We went through after them. Now, we had heard at the hotel that the family lived in Paris, but we were not prepared for the dreadful desolation of that inner court. The living part of the house was on our left, and what had once been a lawn to our right. But the house was discoloured and weather-stained. Green paint of the closed shutters and the door was cracked and blistered. The lawn resembled a wilderness. The grass was long and rank. There were rose trees trailing along the edge and across the path, and a sundial on the lawn reminded me strangely of a drunken man petrified in the middle of a stagger. All this, of course, was what was to be expected in an adventure of this kind. It would do for a Christmas number. But it was not our business to criticize, and after a moment or two we followed the girls who had unlocked the front door and were waiting for us to enter. One of them had gone before to open the shutters. Not a large house, in spite of its name, and we had soon looked through the lower rooms of it. They, too, were just what you would expect. The floors were beeswaxed. There were tables and chairs of a tolerable antiquity, a little damask on the walls, and so on. But what astonished us was the fact that none of the furniture was covered up, or even moved aside, and the dust lay, I should say, 1/2 inch thick on every horizontal surface. I heard the Frenchman crying on his God in an undertone, as is the custom of the Gauls. I bowed a little to Father Moreau. And finally he burst out with a question as to why the rooms were in this state. The girl looked at him stolidly. She was a stout, red-faced girl. "It is by the Count's orders," she said. "And does the Count not come here?" he asked. "No, sir." Then we all went upstairs. One of the girls had preceded us again and was waiting with her hand on the door to usher us in. "See here the room, the most splendid," she said, and threw the door open. It was certainly the room most splendid. It was a great bedchamber hung with tapestry. There were some excellent chairs with carved legs, a fine gold-framed mirror tilted forward over the carved mantelpiece, and above all, and standing out from the wall opposite the window, was a great 4-poster bed with an elaborately carved head to it, and heavy curtains hanging from the canopy. But what surprised us more than anything that we had yet seen was the sight of the bed. Except for the dust that lay on it, it might have been slept in the night before. There were actually damask sheets upon it, thrown back, and 2 pillows, grey with dust. These were not arranged, but tumbled about, as a bed is in the morning before it is made. As I was looking at this, I heard a boy cry out from the washing stand. "Why, it has had water in it," he said. This did not sound exceptional for a basin. We all crowded round to look. It was perfectly true. There was a grey film round the interior of it, and when he disturbed it, as a boy would with his finger, he could see the flowered china beneath. The line came 2/3 of the way up the sides of the basin. It must have been partly filled with water a long while ago, which gradually evaporated, leaving its mark in the dust that must have collected there week after week. The Frenchman lost his patience at that. "My sacred something," he said. "Why is this room like this?" The same girl who had answered him before answered him again in the same words. She was standing by the mantelpiece watching us. "It is the Count's orders," she said stolidly. "It is by the Count's orders that the bed is not made?" snapped the man. "Yes, sir," said the girl simply. Well, that did not content the Frenchman. He exhibited a couple of francs and began to question. This is the story he got out of her. She told it quite simply. The last time that Count Jean-Marie had come to this place, It had been for his honeymoon. He'd come down from Paris with his bride. They had dined together downstairs, very happily and gaily, and slept in the room which we were at this moment. A message had been sent out for the carriage early next morning. The couple had driven away with their trunks, leaving the servants behind. They had not returned, but a message had come from Paris that the house was to be closed. It appeared that the servants who had been left behind had had orders that nothing was to be tidied. Even the bed was not to be made. The rooms were to be locked up and left exactly as they were. The Frenchman had hardly been able to restrain himself as he heard this unconvincing story, though his wife shook him by the shoulders at each violent gesture that he made, and at the end he had to put a torrent of questions. Were they frightened then? I do not know, sir. I mean the bride and bridegroom, fool. I do not know, sir. Sacred name, and why do you not know? I have never seen any of them, sir. Not seen them? Why, you said just now. Yes, sir, but I was not born then. It was 30 years ago. I do not think I've ever seen people so bewildered as we all were. It was entirely unexpected. The Frenchman's jaw dropped. He licked his lips once or twice and turned away. We all stood perfectly still a moment, then we went out. I indulged myself with a pause just there. I was enjoying myself more than I thought I should. I had not told the story for some while, and had forgotten that it was a good one. Beside, it had the advantage of being perfectly true. And then I went on again, with a pleased consciousness of faces turned to me and black-ended cigarettes. I must tell you this, I said. I was relieved to get out of the room, 16 years ago now, and I may have embroidered on my own sensations, but my impression is that I had been just a little uncomfortable even before the girl's story. I don't think that I felt that there was any presence there or anything of that kind. It was rather the opposite. It was the feeling of an extraordinary emptiness. Like a Catholic cathedral in Protestant hands, put in a voice. I nodded at the zealous convert-making Father Brent. It was very like that, I said. And I had, too, the same kind of pathos and terror that one feels in the presence of a child's dead body. It's an unnaturally empty, yet significant, and does not quite know what it signifies. I paused again. Well, Reverend Fathers, that is the first act. We went back to Portrieux. We made inquiries and got no answer. All shrugged their shoulders and said they did not know. There was no tales of the bride's hair turning white in the night, or of any curse or ghost or noises or lights. It was just as I've told you. Went back to England and the curtain came down. Now, generally, such curtains have no resurrection. I suppose we have all had 50 experiences of first acts, and we do not know to this day whether the whole play is a comedy or a tragedy, or even whether the play had been written at all. Do not be modern and elusive, Mr. Benson, said Monsignor. I beg your pardon, Monsignor. I will not. I forgot myself. Well, here's the second act. There are only two, and this is a much shorter one. 9 years later, I was in Paris, staying in the Rue Picot with some Americans. A French friend of theirs was to be married to a man, and I went to the wedding at the Madeleine. It was like all other weddings at the Madeleine. No description can be adequate to the appearance of the officiating clergyman and the altar and the bridesmaids and the French gentlemen with polished boots and butterfly ties and the conversation and the gaiety and the general impression of a confectioner's shop and a milliner's and a salon and a holy church. I observed the bride and the bridegroom, forgot their names for the 20th time, and exchanged some remarks in the sacristy with the leader of the society, who looked like a dissipated priest. With my eyes starting out of my head in my anxiety not to commit a solecism or a barbarism. And then we went home again. On the way home, we discussed the honeymoon. The pair were going down to a country house in Brittany. I inquired the name of it, and of course it was the chateau that I had visited 9 years before. been lent them by Count Jean-Marie II. The gentleman resided in England, I heard, and in order to escape the conscription, he was a connection of the bride's and was about 30 years of age. Well, of course, I was interested and made inquiries and related my adventure, and the Americans were mildly interested too, but not excited. 39 years is ancient history to that energetic nation. I bowed to Father Jenks before I remembered that he was a Canadian, and then pretended that I had not went on too quickly and missed a dramatic opportunity. But 2 days afterwards, they were excited. One of the girls came into déjeuner and said that she had met the bride and bridegroom dining together in the Bois. They had seemed perfectly well and had saluted her politely. It seemed that they had come back to Paris after one night at the chateau, exactly as another bride and bridegroom had done 39 years before. Before I finish, let me sum up the situation. In neither case was there apparently any shocking incident, and yet something had been experienced that broke up plans and sent away immediately from a charming house in the country 2 pairs of persons who had deliberately formed the intention of living there for a while. In both cases, the persons in question had come back to Paris. I need hardly say that I managed to call with my friends upon the bride and bridegroom, and at the risk of being impertinent, asked the bride point blank why they'd changed their plans and come back to town. She looked at me without a trace of horror in her eyes and smiled a little. "It was triste," she said, "a little triste. We thought we would come away. We desired crowds." I paused again. "We desired crowds," I repeated. "You remember, Reverend Fathers, that I had experienced a sense of loneliness even with my friends during 5 minutes spent in that upstairs room. I can only suppose that if I had remained longer, I should have experienced such a further degree of that sensation that I should have felt exactly as those 2 pairs of brides and bridegrooms felt, and have come away immediately. I might even, if I had been an authority, had given orders that nothing was to be touched except my own luggage." "I do not understand that," said Father Brent, looking puzzled. "Nor do I altogether," I answered. "But I think I perceive it to be a fact for all that. One might feel that one was an intruder, that one had meddled with something that desired to be left alone, and that one had better not meddle further in any kind of way." "I suppose you went down there again?" observed Monsignor Maxwell. "I did, a fortnight afterwards. There was only one girl left, the other was married and gone away. She did not remember me. It was 9 years ago, and she was a little redder in the face and a little more stolid. The lawn had been clipped and mown, but it was beginning to grow rank again. I went upstairs with her. The room was comparatively clean, and there was water in the basin, clean sheets on the bed, but a little film of dust lying on everything. I pretended I knew nothing and asked questions, and was told exactly the same story as I'd heard 9 years before, only this time the date was only a fortnight ago. When she had finished, she added, "It happened so once before, sir, before I was born." "Do you understand it?" I said. "No, sir. The house is a little triste, perhaps." "Do you think so, sir?" I said that perhaps it was, and I gave her 2 francs and came away. That's all, Reverend Fathers. There was silence for a minute, and then Padre Bianchi made what I consider a tactless remark. "Bah, that does not terrify me," he said. "Terrify is certainly not the word," remarked Monsignor Maxwell. "I'm not quite sure about that," ended Father Brent. The bell rang for night prayers. "Sum up, Father Rector," said Monsignor without moving. "You've heard all the stories. Mr. Benson is going tomorrow." The old priest smiled as he stood up and was silent for a moment, looking at us all. "I can only sum up like this, with the sentiments with which Monsignor began," he said. "The longer I live, the more I hear and see, the greater I feel my ignorance to be. I heard a man say the other day that Catholics were the only genuine agnostics alive. and that he respected them for it. They knew some things that others did not, but they did not pretend to affirm or deny that of which they had no possibility of judging. Is that what you meant me to say, Monsignor? Monsignor nodded meditatively. I think that is a sound conclusion, he said. I would even go further and say that the stories that we have heard confirm me, at any rate, in what I said at first. Some of them, if the narrators will forgive me, are so utterly pointless and inexplicable when regarded from a human point of view that all they seem to prove is that there must be another. Of course, we all believe that, but most of us don't act as if we did. It's like looking on at the backs of a crowd. They're attending to something else, not to us at all. Just occasionally we catch the eye of someone who turns around. But that is all. He drew up his feet suddenly and leaned forward. Then he went on in a graver voice than it was his custom to use. Or shall we say, each of us is like a newborn child in a great house. In one sense, we are attended to a great deal. All kinds of mysteries are performed of which we are at least partly the object. And what we do know of them, we do know. But that is very little indeed. And meanwhile, there are dark corridors along which footsteps pass. We catch the sound of voices and the glimmer of lights. He broke off and turned to me. It is understood then, Mr. Benson, that if you print these stories, you will add that not one of us commits himself to believe in any of them, except, I suppose, each in his own. I will mention it, I said. Perhaps you might say that we do not even commit ourselves to our own. You can say what you like about yours, of course. I'll mention that too, I said. I will class myself with the rest. The agnostic position is certainly the soundest in all matters outside the deposit of faith. We all stand, then, exactly where we did at the beginning. Certainly I do, said Father Bianchi. We all do, said a number of voices. Then we went to night prayers together for the last time.